The first time I walked up to this place, the front porch was holding a foot of standing water and a dead raccoon. That's the smell that hit me before I ever got my hand on the door. Wet rot and something gone under the floorboards a long time ago. It gets in your throat and stays there. 12 years this house sat empty. 12 years on the market and not one person signed a paper for her. Everyone said, tear it down. The realtor said it. The neighbors said it. The guy who sold me the parcel next door said it while shaking his head like I was slow. Even the county assessor had her marked down to land value, like the house standing on it was worth nothing, or worth less than nothing because somebody'd have to pay to haul her away. But I stood in that flooded doorway and looked up at the ceiling line over the parlor, and it hadn't sagged an inch. 12 years of neglect, no heat, water in the cellar, and that roof ridge was dead level. You can sight down a ridge line like a rifle. If it dips, the frame's failing. This one didn't dip. That tells you something. That tells you somebody built this right the first time. So I bought her for $11,000. The land alone was worth more than that, and I told myself I'd have her livable in about 7 months for somewhere around $65,000 all in. Now let me show you why nobody would touch her and why every last one of them was wrong. She's an 1888 farmhouse. Greek Revival bones with a later kitchen L tacked on the back around 1915. Built by a man named Elias Thorne, according to the deed chain, and Elias was a dairy farmer who apparently knew his way around a timber frame better than most carpenters I've met still breathing. You can tell a lot about a man from the joints he leaves behind. Elias didn't cut a lazy one anywhere in this house. The reason she sat empty comes down to one thing: water. Sometime in the 90s, a previous owner regraded the whole yard to put in a driveway, and they sloped the grade toward the house instead of away from it. Every rainstorm for 25 years ran straight at the foundation, then the sump pump died, nobody noticed, and the basement quietly became a pond. 2-3 feet of standing water down there for who knows how many seasons. By the time she hit the market 12 years ago, the mold report scared off every buyer. The bank wouldn't lend on her because of the moisture readings, and the cash buyers took one look at the water line on the basement wall and walked. So she just waited. And here's the thing folks miss. Sometimes a house doesn't have a fatal problem. She's just got a problem that looks fatal from the driveway. Those are two different things, and knowing the difference is most of what I do for a living. First thing I did, I didn't touch a wall. I cut a trench. Before I opened a single inch of plaster inside, I brought in a mini excavator and regraded that whole yard away from the house. 6 inches of drop over the first 10 feet all the way around. Water's dumb. It only goes downhill, and if you tell it to go downhill, away from the house, it obeys you every time. Then I laid a French drain, 4-inch perforated pipe, bedded in washed gravel, wrapped in filter fabric so the silt doesn't clog it, running the water down to the tree line about 100 feet off. I also dug down along the foundation and troweled on a damp-proofing membrane, then backfilled with more gravel so any water that does reach her has somewhere to drain instead of pressing on the stone. That whole exterior water job cost me about $2,200 and 3 days of machine time. And I'll tell you, that trench is the single most important thing I did on this entire job. Not the kitchen, not the floors. The trench, you fix the water first, or you're just decorating a problem and handing it to the next fool. Every restoration that fails because somebody skipped the boring part on the outside to get to the pretty part on the inside. Then I went in and started opening walls, and that's where the real story lives. The plaster in the parlor came off in wet sheets, heavy, black with mold near the floor, and clean as a whistle up high. Now that's important, and here's why. That pattern told me the water damage was all rising damp coming up out of that flooded basement, not falling in through the roof. And that's good news, actually. A wet roof rots a house from the top down, and by the time you see it, the whole thing's punky. A wet basement only wrecks the bottom 2 feet if you catch it. And somebody, by pure dumb luck, had left a couple of windows cracked all those years so the top of the house could breathe and dry out between storms. That accidental ventilation probably saved this frame. The previous owners didn't mean to do me a favor, but they did. The wiring was the ugly part, and it was ugly. Knob and tube from the 20s in the front of the house. That's the old system. Single wires run through porcelain knobs, and honestly left alone and unmessed with, knob and tube isn't the monster people think. But somebody in the 60s spliced modern circuits right into it. Cloth-covered wire twisted together by hand, no junction boxes, and just shoved back into the wall cavity. That's not a repair. That's a house fire waiting on a match. I found 4 of those splices before I stopped counting. All of it had to come out, every foot of it. I also found the old lead water supply running in from the well, and a chimney flue with no liner and a crack you could slide a nickel into. That flue would have cooked the framing around it the first time somebody lit a wood stove. So that went on the list too. This is the part of demolition nobody films, the part where you write down all the ways the house could kill somebody and you cross them off one at a time. But then I pulled the baseboard off the parlor's north wall, and I stopped working for about 10 minutes. Just stood there with the wrecking bar hanging in my hand. Behind that wall, framing the original parlor doorway, was the woodwork. Fluted casing, hand-planed, with a corner block carved into a little sunburst. Elias, or somebody Elias hired, had run that molding by hand with a wooden plane, and you can still see the faint tracks where the blade rode, little chatter marks the width of a thumbnail. And it was chestnut, American chestnut, which you cannot buy anymore, not for any money, because the blight killed every last standing tree in this country by 1940. This trim was cut from a tree that was already old when Lincoln was president. The rod had only taken the bottom 8 inches of it, right at the floor where the damp climbed. The rest was perfect, hard as iron under my knife, that deep honey color you only get from old-growth wood grown slow over a century. I pulled every piece off the wall, numbered the backs in pencil, took a photo of each so I'd know where it went, and set them aside like they were made of glass. That chestnut casing was going to be the heart of this whole house. I just didn't know yet how much fight it'd take to get it there. Now the bones, with the walls open, I could finally read the frame, and Elias did not disappoint me. The main sills, those are the timbers that sit right down on the foundation and carry the entire weight of the house, and those were the ones I lost sleep over. Water always finds the sill first because that's the lowest wood there is, and sure enough, the front sill, an 8x8 hemlock beam, 30 feet long, had rotted through about 1/3 of its length, soft as a wet sponge on the driveway side, right where all that water had been running at her for 25 years. I pushed my whole thumb into it without trying. You don't replace a sill like that by yanking it out. The whole house is sitting on it. Pull it, and you'll drop the corner and crack her open like an egg. So I did what the old-timers did. I built cribbing, stacks of 6x6 blocks, laid up log cabin style so the load spreads even, and set 2 20-ton bottle jacks under the main girt where the frame could take the push. Then I lifted the front of the house slow, 1/4 inch a day over about a week. You rush a lift like that and you crack every window and every good plaster wall left in the place. I'd give each jack maybe a 1/4 turn in the morning, then walk away and let her settle into it all day. Patience is a structural material. People forget that. A house that stood 137 years doesn't want to be hurried, and she'll punish you if you try. Once she was up, I cut out the rotted section of sill with a chainsaw and a slick and scarfed in a new pressure-treated timber. A scarf joint's just a long, angled splice, maybe 18 inches of overlap, cut so the 2 pieces lock together and share the load instead of just butting end to end. I bolted through it with 1/2-inch galvanized rod, 3 of them, and glued the faces. That splice is stronger now than the original beam ever was on its best day. Here's my mistake, and it's a good one to learn from. When I lifted the house, I didn't account for one interior partition that turned out to be load-bearing, carrying a bedroom floor above it. I'd read it as a simple divider, just a wall splitting 2 rooms. So when I jacked the front up, that partition wanted to stay put while everything around it rose, and it opened a crack in the upstairs ceiling about 4 feet long. That one's on me. Cost me a day and a sheet of plaster to make right, and it taught me a lesson I already knew but had gotten lazy about. Test every wall before you touch a jack. You knock on it, you check if the joists above run parallel to it or land on it. You put a level on the floor and watch how it moves when you lift. I know all that. I skipped a step because I was in a hurry and the house reminded me. 30 years in and she can still humble you. That's not a bad thing. The day this stops humbling me is the day I should quit. The rest of the frame was flat out astonishing. Mortise and tenon joints, every single one pinned with a hand-riven oak peg, and not one of them had loosened in 137 years. You put a wrench on the modern stuff and it's all metal plates and nails that back out over time. This was cut to fit and pegged tight, and it'll outlast anything I could build to replace it. She's got good bones. I mean that literally. I could have built a brand new house for what it cost me to save this frame, and I know that. But I'd never build one this strong, and neither would anybody else because nobody frames like this anymore. Nobody can afford the hours it takes. So when I find one still standing, my job is to not be the guy who ruins it. With the structure sound and dried out, I move to the guts, the stuff you never see and can't live without. All new electrical, a 200 amp panel, and I ran fresh wire to every room. Where I could, I ran it in conduit through the basement so the next guy in 50 years can pull a new circuit without opening up a finished wall. That's a courtesy you leave for the man who comes after you. The full rewire with a licensed electrician setting the panel and the town on inspector signing off ran about $7,000. Non-negotiable, that one. You do not cheap out on the thing that can burn the house down at 3 in the morning. Plumbing was mostly gone. The old galvanized supply pipe had rusted shut from the inside. Pressure down to a trickle you couldn't rinse a plate under. I ran all new PEX. That's the flexible line, and I like it in this climate because it gives a little when the cold gets into a wall. Copper splits when a Vermont winter finds a weak spot and then you're chasing a leak inside a finished ceiling in February. New waste lines, a new vent stack up through the roof, and a proper high-efficiency water heater tucked in the cellar. And this is where the season started leaning on me. I opened these walls in late September. Easy weather, and by the time I was ready to insulate, it was the second week of November, and we'd already had a hard frost 2 nights running. In Vermont, you don't get to argue with November. The ground was setting up like concrete and the house still had no working heat. Insulation is the thing that makes an old farmhouse actually livable instead of just charming to look at. These walls had nothing in them, just air and a little horsehair plaster keying through the lath. In 1888, they heated with cordwood and wore wool indoors, and the house was never meant to hold warmth. So I dense packed the exterior walls with cellulose blown in tight, packed to about 3.5 pounds a cubic foot so it can't settle over the years and leave a cold gap up at the top of the cavity where you'd never see it. In the attic, I laid 14 inches of loose fill, brought her up to about an R50, and I air sealed every penetration first, every wire hole and pipe chase, because insulation over an air leak is like a blanket with the window open. The insulation and air sealing together ran about $5,800. In this climate. It pays itself back in heating oil in under 6 winters. And after that, it's just money in your pocket every cold month for the rest of the life of the house. I did the whole thing right as the temperature dropped into the teens, working with a propane heater going in the corner just to keep my hands loose enough to hold a hose. I got the new furnace fired and the house warm the day before the first real snowstorm of the year. Cut it close. Closer than I like. But once she was warm and dry inside, for the first time in a dozen years, that old plaster stopped smelling like a cellar and started smelling like a house again. That's a real thing. A dry house has a smell, and it's a good one. Then came the part where the work starts to show. The floors were wide plank pine, original to the house, buried under 3 layers of linoleum and a lake's worth of old water stains. I pulled the linoleum up, and here's a small mercy. Where it had been glued down flat, it had actually sealed the pine underneath and protected it. The worst looking floor in the house turned out to be the best board once I got the glue off. I rented a drum sander and took them down slow, 3 grits, coarse to fine, keeping the machine moving so it wouldn't dig a dish in a soft spot. Then I finished them with a penetrating oil instead of polyurethane. Oil soaks in and lets an old floor keep looking and feeling like wood, instead of sitting under a plastic shell that scratches white and looks like a gym. These boards are heart pine, some of them 14 inches wide, sawn from trees nobody's cutting anymore. You can't buy a plank that wide today for love or money. The kitchen I built simple and honest. Shaker cabinets I made myself in the shop over a few weeks, painted a soft sage green, hung on a face frame so they'll still be tight in 50 years. And soapstone counter, because soapstone was the local stone right here in this valley, quarried not 20 miles off. And it's what would have gone into a farmhouse like this if they'd had the money. It takes a hot pan without a mark, and it just gets darker and better as it ages. Copper farmhouse sink to go with it. No island the size of a Buick. Just a good work kitchen where a person can actually cook. The kitchen came to about $14,000, most of that in the counter and the appliances. I opened up the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Kept one beam exposed across the top so you can read the old bones. and let the light run all the way through the house east to west. Old farmhouses were built as a warren of little rooms on purpose to trap heat before there was insulation. Now that she's sealed and packed tight, I can open her up and let her breathe and let the sun through, and she doesn't lose a thing for it. And then the chestnut. I took that hand-planed casing I'd numbered and set aside, and I brought it into the shop over the winter, worked on it nights. The rotted bottoms I scarfed with new chestnut I'd salvaged off a wrecked barn beam a few towns over because you can't buy the wood, and I wasn't about to patch it with anything lesser. I ground a custom knife for my molder to match Elias's flute profile exactly. Ran a few test pieces till the new molding read the same as his by lamplight, then spliced the good old wood to the new. Cleaned it, waxed it by hand, and that honey glow came right back up out of it. Then I reinstalled every piece around the parlor doorway right where it started, that little carved sunburst corner block set back exactly where his hands left it 137 years ago. That casing is the oldest thing in the house, and now it's the first thing you see. Let me walk you through her. Finished. You come up the drive now, and the water runs away from the house instead of at it. The clapboards are painted a warm cream with black windows, and that front porch that held a foot of water and a dead raccoon is rebuilt from the joists up, new fur decking, square columns turned on the lathe to match the two originals I could save. Through the front door, the entry opens up onto those 14-inch heart pine floors, glowing under the oil finish, warm underfoot for the first time in decades. Turn left into the parlor, and there's the chestnut casing framing the doorway, honey gold, that little sunburst block catching the afternoon light off the west windows. The whole reason I bought her stands right there, straight back into the kitchen, sage cabinets and dark soapstone in that copper sink, the light running clean through the opened wall to the dining room beyond, east to west, one end of the house to the other. Off the kitchen, the bathroom. Simple, white subway tile run to the ceiling, a cast iron clawfoot tub I found for $90 and reglazed myself over 2 evenings, and a hexagon tile floor like they'd have laid in 1915 when the L went on. And back out front, standing at the end of that regraded drive with the water finally running the right way, she looks like exactly what she was always supposed to be. Not a tear down, a farmhouse, somebody's home again. All in, I spent about $63,000 in right around 7.5 months to bring back a house every single person told me to demolish. A house that sat empty for 12 years because of a grading mistake and a dead sump pump, two things that cost $2,200 to put right. And the most expensive thing in her, that chestnut, the thing worth more than the whole rest of the trim put together, I pulled out of the wall for free. Here's the thing nobody understood for 12 years. This house never had a fatal flaw. She had a fixable one that looked fatal from the driveway, and everybody trusted the look instead of the house. Somebody built this right the first time back in 1888, and my whole job was just to not be the guy who ruins it. The water was the villain the entire time, and the water cost $2,200 to send the other direction. Everything after that was just honoring the work of a man who's been dead 100 years. Next one's already waiting on me. It's a little cape up the valley with a center chimney running straight through the middle of the house, and when I pulled a loose brick out of that chimney, I found a date scratched into the mortar and a signature underneath it. I can't quite read yet. I aim to find out who that was before I put the brick back. I'll see you over there.